I'm going to be reading for about 12, 13 minutes. I'm reading two shorter pieces, a nonfiction piece that was published in Reader Vida in 2013 called Skirmish, and then a short piece of fiction. And please excuse my pronunciation of foreign words in these. You'll notice a slight trip when I come to some of them, perhaps. Okay, Skirmish. A certain excitement comes from exploring the edge of things. Perhaps that's why in 1994, my husband and I took jobs in Bangkok, and why, on our trip along the very north of Thailand and through Mae Sai, we decided to stay in a guest house overlooking the river marking the Burmese border. We imagined a view. How could there not be one? But the Sai River turned out to be a slick brown ribbon between low banks, and even this modest view was partially obscured by the bland new house across the road. As for the guest house, it was a huge plastered affair, reaching up 3 stories in a maze of rooms and bathrooms and balconies. After getting lost coming back from the bathroom, I memorized the route, left at the corner, left again at the wash basin set into the wall, sharp right to our room. We'd arrived well past midday, and the guest house restaurant was almost deserted. We took a table overlooking the road, despite the dust and smells of exhaust that drifted up to us, and ate fried rice under the clamor of a television tuned to CNN. By the time we left to explore the town, the afternoon felt flattened by the sun. We took pictures by the bridge into Burma, for all that it was a rather ordinary concrete 2-lane construction, and its Thai and Burmese flags drooped for lack of a breeze. A few other tourists were posing along the railings, but the stream of people passing behind us were locals headed to the high blue gate at the bridge's far end. Beyond it stood the Burmese town of Tachalek, with its grey buildings, its wide-crowned trees, its temple with its ornately layered roof, and for a backdrop, wooded hills fading into the distance. To come to the northernmost point of Thailand and stop felt incomplete, although we'd never intended to cross. Some colleagues at the international university where I was teaching had toured Burma and reported no evidence of the Slok government's heavy hand, no sign of people being forced to repair ruins for tourists to visit. They said they'd been surprised to find that people seemed content under the regime. A Burmese friend had been upset by their comments. Of course, they had seen nothing, she said. Tourists weren't supposed to see what was going on, were they? Mae Sai had an off-kilter feel to it, as many border towns do. In truth, we had little to occupy us. We took our pictures on the bridge. We looked in a few shops. We walked the length of the main street and stopped for cold drinks. But for tourists like us, this was a town to pass through. As the afternoon heat thickened, we found ourselves outside our guest house once more. It was too soon to slip back into that strange world of CNN and menus in English. Instead, we followed the road along the river and kept going where it narrowed to a path between straggling bushes. Through the undergrowth, we glimpsed the forlorn river and its Burmese shore, so close we could have lobbed stones onto its bank. To our surprise, the further we walked, the more people we passed. In one spot where the bushes gave way to wispy grass, a knot of locals were staring across the water. A bend in the river, an elbow of exposed gravel. On it, an overturned military truck black with soot. From time to time in this area, there were skirmishes between the Slok army and drug lord Khun Sa, but right in town? Only a recent attack would have drawn a crowd of locals, and that made staring at what was left of the truck ghoulish, but also undeniably exciting. There'd been an incident, right here, an intrusion of chaos and danger into the quiet, ordered world that we imagine we inhabit. I carried that unsettled prickle of a feeling with me as we headed off along the path. A man might have been killed in that truck, perhaps several men on that ordinary stretch of gravel. This was how people died, wasn't it? In skirmishes with attackers or disease or other misfortunes that were soon lost to memory. Before long, the bushes had grown taller, the path narrower. The air hung more heavily here, but we pressed on until we encountered 2 men craning their necks to see past the bushes. Perched on the water's edge, A burnt-out Jeep was leaking smoke into the air. In an instant, everything was in uproar. From further up the path came shouting, a handful of men running, standing spread-armed amongst the weeds. Then a camera crew in fatigues was hurtling past us. In the rear came a long-chinned foreigner with a bandana around his hair and a heavy camera awkward on his shoulder. A few yards away, a barrel of a white man stepped into the path, middle-aged, sunglasses hiding his eyes, hands planted on hips. His trousers were camouflage, his hair cut soldier short. Through his t-shirt, the thickness of his arms and chest showed. He stared after the camera crew in an appraising way, his mouth busy with gum. There was no question of going further. We turned back, but I wish I'd asked someone, "What's going on? Do you know? Does anyone?" The sinking sun turned the plaster of our guest house a delicate orange. The air was cool in the restaurant. We took a table looking down on the road and drank sodas. On the television, Robert Frost was interviewing Margaret Thatcher. Along the street hummed motorbikes and small trucks, so overloaded that they squatted on their axles. From across the river came the thin blare of canned military music and the occasional roar of a truck pulling up the hill. Otherwise, all was quiet, and what a quiet it was. Had people in Toucher Lake shut themselves away because trouble was stirring, or did the town across the border always turn so still in the evening? It was dinner time, but I couldn't keep my eyes on the menu. I ordered a curry at random and turned back to stare across the river. It was nearly dark when a truck pulled up at the house across the road. From it jumped a dozen young men in black, some in running shoes, some in flip-flops, all of them with guns slung over their shoulders. Quick as mice, they disappeared into the building. Someone else was watching too. The man with the crew cut, shades high on his head now, still chewing. When night came, the town across the river vanished except for a few scattered lights. My husband and I sat drinking beer and eating our curries that had been slow in coming. The restaurant was packed now. How uncomfortably bright the restaurant felt, how conspicuous with all that light blazing into the darkness. I lifted my glass clumsily. My hand didn't quite feel like my own, and the beer, when I finished it, too bitter to be pleasant. I wiped my mouth. All around us floated chatter about visas and treks to see hill tribes, but beneath it all, I heard the dreadful quiet I'd been listening to all along, as though we were hanging on the edge of each moment. I wondered, if a mortar were launched from across the river, would we hear it before it hit? I imagined the table splintering apart, bodies hurled into the air. I made myself stop. We could have sat in the restaurant for longer. We could have ordered more beer or sodas or ice cream. The Thatcher interview was over and a news program had come on in its place. But my unease had made it difficult to sit and face the dark beyond the guest house. Never mind that our room upstairs was bare except for a bed, a small fan and a wooden chair, and that the light was too dingy to read by. I was in no mood for reading. I brushed my teeth at the wash basin cemented into the wall in the corridor, then locked our door. I lay beside my husband and wondered if tonight the world would end for us, or if not for us, for tourists in another room, or the young men holed up in the house across the street, or the soldiers across the border, and how easy and tragic it felt, as though we were all too slight to matter. Well, I'm going to read a maybe slightly less sad piece. This next piece was published in JMWW online last year. It's called Raslabsia, and I apologize for my lack of a proper Russian accent. So this is a piece of fiction. She's replacing a panel, hands ungainly in stiff gloves, intent on each twist of metal as she screws it out of its hole. This is how she was trained: to see only the metal glinting in her helmet's light, to ignore the massive hull of the space station over which she floats and the infinite space beyond. At the edge of her vision, something intrudes and she glances up, There's Krasnov working on the solar array, head slanted down, legs suspended at an impossible angle, but it wasn't him that caught her eye. Behind him, Earth's rising up like a colossal balloon. Queasiness stirs in her belly, and she swallows against it. Out here, your sense of your own existence can become unmoored by your colleague dangling upside down, by your planet hanging overhead. She should look away, but she doesn't. Against the desolate monochrome of space, Earth's radiant. The Pacific's a heartbreaking blue. North America's decked out in greens and browns. Down there, impossibly far away, her tender husband, their toddling baby girl, their backyard with the swing set and peonies. And in that instant, her body understands. She's 250 miles up. Fear spikes through her and she grabs hold of a truss as though she might fall, as though she isn't already falling with the space station in its infinitesimally slow descent around Earth. Through her headset, Krasnov. Everything A-okay? His accent makes the word thing. She says, sure, I'm good, but her voice is tight. Distance had shrunken him to toy size, his suit bright against the shadow of the array. It's quite the sight, she says. Raslabsia. Sure, Raslabsia. She laughs, and he does too. When things go wrong, Raslabsia. When you freak out, Raslabsia. Relax, chill, take it easy. He gives a stiff wave, then slips into the array's shadow. It's like watching him vanish into a pool of dark water. She looks away and repositions herself over the panel. 6 more screws, only 6. She slows her breathing, focuses. Up here, time's accelerated. 45 minutes after the sun comes blasting over the Earth's rim, it dips away. By the time she looks up again, night is eating its way across West Africa, across a storm coiled over the Atlantic, and the world vanishes. Soon, darkness is pouring over the space station too. First one module winks out, then the next. Moments later, the panel's gone, and her outstretched arm. Where it was, there's nothing. She flexes her hand. No resistance of glove against fingers, no sensation of muscles moving under skin. In front of her, nothing. When she turns, nothing, and panic flares up her throat. No gleam from a helmet light, no shimmer from long dead stars, only this absence of everything that ever was and ever will be. This is what it means for time not to have begun, for the universe not to exist, for panic to be pointless, and how easy it is to let go. Raslabsia, Raslabsia, Raslabsia. Thank you.